What's the scariest fact you wish you didn't know? Story 1. You can become conscious during CPR resuscitation efforts, to the point of moving and sometimes even violently reacting, but still not survive cardiac arrest. It's called CPR induced consciousness. It's rare, but there are cases where patients have been aware enough to push caregivers away or tell them to stop CPR. Story 2. There is a waterborne microscopic brain eating amoeba that can enter your body through your nose. It is found in fresh water and can be present at water parks and pools. It is fatal within about 5 days, and there is no way to really test for it before it's typically too late. Survival is very unlikely. Story 3. Brain aneurysms can happen to anyone, at any age, and most are fatal. Yep, knew a girl who was early teens who died of cancer. Went to bed with a headache, woke up and started getting ready for school, and collapsed. She was air-flown to a world-renowned hospital. We live in the city that it's in, but no amount of medical treatment could save her. Story 4. The fact that I was born with congenital heart disease means that any time, at random, without warning, one of my valves or part of my heart muscles can suddenly collapse or disintegrate. I would be dead within a matter of days or weeks. Only annual checkups can help find the smallest of hints to prevent this. And even annual checkups aren't foolproof. My father-in-law had 2 heart transplants and saw his doctors all the time. The day he died, he had a checkup with his transplant cardiologist. Everything looked okay as it could be for him. About 7 hours later, he had a massive heart attack and was dead before he could even call my mother-in-law. I stay on my husband's butt now to keep up on his appointments and testing. Even that doesn't give me peace of mind. Story 5. There is something called the R on T phenomenon. I won't get into EKGs or anything, but basically, if your heart beats at the wrong time in your normal cycle, you can go into cardiac arrest. This was seen with that NFL football player who had a sudden collapse on the field a year or two back. That sudden beat that occurs can also result from a sudden hit to the chest, such as a baseball hitting you square in the chest at the wrong time in your heart cycle. Story 6. My town is built around the calderas of 2 massive supervolcanoes, one of which has produced 2 of the most powerful eruptions ever and had the alert level raised for the first time just over 12 months ago due to increased activity. That makes me think of the Krakatoa eruption in 1883. It was confirmed the explosion was heard in Perth, Australia. Perth is almost 2,000 miles from Krakatoa. It was also heard on an island near Mauritius, which is off the coast of Africa and about 3,000 miles away. That was a hell of an explosion, and Krakatoa isn't even a supervolcano. Related, as it turns out, in 1883, it was super trendy in the US to own a barometer, and tons of people did. Barometers measure atmospheric pressure. Thanks in part to thousands of barometers being owned in the US, they were able to figure out that a wave of air pressure from the eruption traveled around the Earth 7 times. 37. Even if you're the safest, most skillful driver in the world, you still have no way to protect yourself from other bad drivers. This really messed me up after my first, and hopefully only, serious car accident. My car slid off the road and got stuck, so I got in and started to call American Automobile Association. But then a pickup truck hit the same patch of ice and ran into me. All I could do was brace for impact, and I could see the panic in the driver's eyes once he realized he couldn't stop. Luckily, it was a windy road, so he was already going pretty slow, but my car was totaled. The tiny sedan was no match for an old F-150. We were both fine, but the fact that we both were doing everything right and that still happened really got me. Story 8. That prions exist. The worst part is how difficult they are to kill. Normal sterilization techniques don't work. If someone with prions was operated on and the tools were sterilized by normal means, the next person who has surgery with those tools could get prions from them. Everything about them is crazy. Story 9. There are tons of safety standards we take for granted, but the regulated industries continually try to weaken them. And since we take them for granted, there are only a handful of people who advocate for the public good, like drinking water standards. There's a whole industry lobbying to weaken them, and like 3 people on the other side. Story 10. I work with people with disabilities, and I accidentally ended up the expert in my office on conversion disorder. Conversion disorder is where psychological trauma manifests as a physical disability. The military used to call it hysterical paralysis, where combat personnel would develop paralysis due to their unsupported PTSD from combat. The terrifying part is how common it is among children, because there are 3 primary causes of that kind of trauma among children: being in a war zone, being in a car accident with fatalities or extremely traumatic circumstances, or severe abuse. And of all the kids and families who I've worked with, 1 kid was a refugee from some pretty awful crap, and 1 kid was with a foster family because he saw his parents die in a car accident. The rest of the kids I worked with, more than 100, had no record of major trauma. There are other causes, but for kids who grew up in suburbia in the Western First World, they're like reverse lottery wins. They're so unlikely. Story 11. I mentioned this recently in another thread. We are currently in the sixth major extinction event in the history of the planet, called the Holocene extinction. Flora and fauna are rapidly becoming extinct due to human activity. As far as I understand it, the coming generations are going to suffer resource shortages. There is nothing we can do to stop it. We can only slow it down. But most people I've met and talked to about it do not take it seriously, or they just roll their eyes and go, yeah, whatever, crazy scientist. Your children may suffer. Your grandchildren will suffer. I don't even want to think about how later generations will suffer. Story 12. The fact that sometimes your lungs can just kind of collapse. I'm agoraphobic, and that one's a big fear of mine in particular. It's way more likely to happen to skinny folks from my understanding, though. So at least I can calm down by reminding myself, I'm fat estimated time of arrival. I'm only at a point in recovery where talking about the specifics of how agoraphobia affects me beyond, I'm scared of a thing, tends to make me spiral because I only recently started getting therapy for it. So please stop asking. Thank you. Story 13. There's no check on any U.S. president launching the entire nuclear arsenal at any target for any reason. He asks for the football, cracks the biscuit, codes, dials, and gives the order. As long as it's his voice, anyone who says no after that is violating the chain of command. SecDef, state, no one else has to approve. In about 20 minutes, missiles will be airborne. There is no way to splash them or disarm them once airborne. Story 14. How our topsoil is becoming lifeless due to traditional, outdated farming practices, tilling monoculture, pesticide, Roundup use, etc., and pesticides like Roundup. Yet Monsanto is still pushing it, deeming it safe. Goddamn liars, my grandfather died from non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is known to be caused from Roundup glyphosate exposure. And he was a farmer who relied on it because farming practices kill the life in the soil. So farmers are basically required to use it. Otherwise, they won't successfully grow enough crops because big infestation is so high from the lack of life and lack of biodiversity in our ecosystems. Story 15. Facts about meteorites/asteroids/celestial objects. We are currently tracking about approximately 1,500 objects that have potential collision courses with Earth and could cause catastrophic damage. There are approx 20 or so objects that impact Earth a year. Every 15, 20 years, you get something like the Russian meteor event from a few years back, which had it landed in a populated area, could have possibly leveled a city. Most of these objects land in the ocean and or break up to nearly nothing of substantial concern. But make no mistake, there have been more devastating meteor impacts on Earth in its history than there have been jackpot lottery winners. You have a better chance of dying from an asteroid impact than you do winning the Powerball or Mega. Story 16. I read an article the other day about the Malaysian airline flight that disappeared in 2014. There's good evidence the lead pilot did it intentionally. The change in course was perfectly timed to the handoff from Kuala Lumpur to Vietnam air traffic control, and a bunch of automatic systems that should have broadcast their location were switched off just before the plane changed course. The turn was so tight that only an experienced pilot could have done it. It's terrifying to think a pilot could just do something like that, and no one could stop them because of locks on the cockpit door. Story 17. If a random quantum fluctuation causes the fundamental properties of any point anywhere in the universe to decay to a more stable state, that new state of the universe will propagate through space in all directions at the speed of light, erasing reality as we know it as it goes and replacing it with an entirely different universe where matter and energy might not even be able to exist. Since this bubble universe expands at the speed of light, you cannot see it coming, you cannot know it is coming, and it will erase you in less than a millisecond when it arrives. Story 18. I don't actually know how scary this is, but 100 years from now, everything you have saved digitally will pretty much be inaccessible by your descendants. Physical media will survive, like books and actual tangible photos. But that album of your kid growing up, with the videos of her first words or him graduating high school, nobody is going to be able to watch it or even really know that it exists. There's no way they would even be able to interface with it. Entire lives that we now document on our phones, and they'll just poof into thin air one day because none of us ever think to physically print them out and save them. Story 19. How much dementia sucks? It's a very variable disease. I have one resident who's just the sweetest, most charismatic old lady. She cannot participate in a conversation in a meaningful way but she still loves to chat. She is constantly confused by her lap belt and tries to pull it off, despite the fact that she has had to wear it for years now, as she can no longer safely stand, but 100% tries to at every opportunity. It feels cruel for me to make her wear it, and I can't count how many times I've told her she's in a hospital. She's always surprised. If it's hard for me to watch, it must feel like some form of hell for her. She can't understand us. She doesn't know where she is, how she got there, why she's tied to her chair, where her kids and husband are, who these old people are sitting around her, why we won't get her some scissors to cut the belt off. I can only imagine what it was like when she was newly diagnosed and aware she was going to lose her awareness. Like I said, it's very variable, even within the same types of dementia. One day we checked in a man I'd built a friendship with, a brilliant academic. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know who he was. He wasn't talking sense. He stripped off his clothes and threw himself on the floor. It progressed quickly, and he lost his ability to get up, then to eat and drink, move his eyes, breathe. I took up counseling to get through that one. Story 20. Doctors performed an operation called lobotomy on patients with severe mental health problems in the 1930s until the last lobotomy in the US in 1967. In this operation, the frontal lobes of the brain were basically destroyed, and the patient rendered into apathy, passivity, lack of initiative, poor ability to concentrate, and a generally decreased depth and intensity of their emotional response to life. William Beecher Scoville, professor of neurosurgery at Yale, went first. His patient was conscious. The administration of a local anesthetic allowed the surgeon to slice through the scalp and peel down the skin from the patient's forehead, exposing her skull. Quick work with the drill opened 2 holes, one over each eye. Now Scoville could see her frontal lobes. He levered each side up with a flat blade so that he could perform what he called orbital undercutting, although what followed was not quite cutting. Instead, Scoville inserted a suction catheter, a small electrical vacuum cleaner, and sucked out a portion of the patient's frontal lobes. The patient was then wheeled out and a replacement was secured to the operating table. Walter Freeman, a professor of neurology at George Washington University, was next. He had no surgical training and no Connecticut medical license, so he was operating illegally. Not that such a minor matter seemed to bother anyone present. Freeman was working on developing an assembly line approach so that lobotomies could be performed quickly and easily. His technique allowed him to perform 20 or more operations in a single day. He proceeded to use shocks from an electroconvulsive therapy machine to render his female patient unconscious and then inserted an ice pick beneath one of her eyelids until the point rested on the thin, bony structure in the orbit. A few quick taps with a hammer broke through the bone and allowed him to sever portions of the frontal lobes using a sweeping motion with the ice pick. The instrument was withdrawn and inserted into the other orbit, and within minutes, the process was over. It was, Freeman boasted, such a simple operation that he could teach any damned fool, even a psychiatrist, to perform it in 20 minutes or so. Story 21. If you consume contaminated food or water, chances are you have gotten yourself a tapeworm. If it's the larva you consumed, it'll basically be living inside of you. And if you don't notice it, then it could grow up to 8 meters in height. If it's the egg, then it gets spread out throughout your body, into your muscles, and maybe some organs. I said, throughout your body, so your brain is fair game. Once grown into a larva, it can literally eat away at your brain, causing epilepsy. Story 22. One disturbing fact is related to the capabilities of artificial superintelligence, ASI. ASI refers to a hypothetical AI that surpasses human intelligence in every domain, including creativity, general wisdom, and social skills. The unsettling aspect is the control problem. Once an ASI is created, it might become impossible for humans to control. This AI could redesign itself at an incomprehensible rate, leading to an intelligence explosion. If its goals are not perfectly aligned with human values, it could pose an existential risk, using its superior intelligence to achieve its objectives in ways that might be harmful to humanity. The prospect of creating something far smarter than the smartest humans and then losing control over it is a deeply unsettling concept. Story 23. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, is a motor neuron degenerative disease. Long story short, motor neurons that drive muscle activity begin dying. As they die, you progressively get weaker, begin to lose motor control, problems walking, swallowing, etc., are totally paralyzed, and then die of respiratory failure. Once you're diagnosed, you have about 5-7 years. The scary part is that 90% of cases are sporadic. There is no rhyme or reason or clear genetic cause. You just get it. Story 24. You know that scene from The Rock where a child's doll turns out to be a bomb? The use of mines and booby traps is restricted under Protocol 2 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which includes a list of children's toys. Russia has been accused of placing these kinds of traps in children's toys, though it is unknown how long ago this practice began. Remember that while there is some information from news stories, I am exclusively discussing Russia in this. I'm quite certain that comparable atrocities are committed by other countries. Story 25. Radiation poisoning kills you on a molecular level. Because the irradiated isotopes are unstable, they are exchanging protons and neutrons to stabilize themselves. This is why uranium and plutonium are used for nuclear reactions. When a nuclear chain reaction happens, the isotopes are throwing off neutrons, which hits other isotopes, and thus you have a nuclear reaction. Radiation poisoning happens when those free neutrons pass through the human body. Depending on the type of radiation, alpha, beta, gamma, it'll either tear up only the DNA or your skin cells, or go deeper. When DNA in your cells is destroyed, your cells can no longer function. It'll either turn into a tumor, or it'll stop replenishing the cell supply, leading to tissue degradation. Your body literally melts off all around you as tissue falls apart because their cells' DNA is destroyed. With radiation poisoning, you'll either die from a tumor or the complete degradation of your body. Neither one is a pleasant experience. Story 26. I see so many life or death examples. Mine is not that. Mine is the double slit experiment that concludes that our world functions like a simulation, reality changed by observation. If nothing in the world is concrete, if nothing follows rules, then what is reality? What am I? What is observing me? Follow that up with magenta being a figment of each individual's imagination, and I am truly horrified. Existential crisis time. Story 27. There was a man who lived from 1880 to 1932 named Eben Byers. He was a socialite and on his way to become a professional golfer. He even won the 1906 U.S. Amateur Golf Tournament. Then, in 1927, Byers received an arm injury from falling out of a bunk bed. A doctor prescribed a patented medication called Radithor. It was a drug created by a man named William J.A. Bailey. What Byers didn't know is that Bailey had lied about receiving a medical record. What he also didn't know was that Radithor contained radium, an extremely radioactive element. Nonetheless, Byers ended up using the drug. At first, the drug seemed to be working, as Byers' arm seemed to be getting better. However, by 1930, the side effects of the deadly drug kicked in. He ended up experiencing painful headaches, and he lost a noticeable amount of weight. By 1930, his teeth had begun to fall out, and that's when he stopped using the drug. But the damage was done. In 1931, the Federal Trade Commission found out about the danger of Radithor and asked Byers for a testimony on the effects. However, he was so sick that they had to send a lawyer to get a written statement instead. When the lawyer arrived, he was in for quite a gruesome shock. The lawyer reported that Byers was missing his entire upper jaw, except for his front teeth and most of his lower jaw. This is called radium jaw, which occurs when radium is ingested. The lawyer also reported that most of his tissue was disintegrating and that holes were beginning to form in his head. There is actually a photo of Byers missing his jaw, but it is extremely graphic. I highly suggest you don't look it up if you're easily squeamish. Eventually, Byers died from cancer, most likely caused by radiation poisoning. He was so radioactive when he died that his coffin was built with lead to prevent any sort of leak. In fact, in 1965, when his body was exhumed, it was found that his body was still releasing radioactive energy. It is unknown if his body is still radioactive to this day or not. Story 28. In any city or town, the likelihood that one or more of your neighbors has a key to your house without your knowledge is incredibly high, and going to the hardware store to purchase a new lock does not change the likelihood. It simply changes which neighbors are likely to have a key to your house. Most keyed lock sets come in pairs, since most homes have more than 2 entry points, and homeowners want to keep all the locks keyed. The same lock manufacturers package multiple sets of locks all keyed alike so that the homeowner can just purchase the quantity of locks they need all keyed alike. This even happens across styles and finishes of the same brand, because there are multiples of the same lock, keyed in exactly the same way at the hardware store. It is highly likely that multiple homes in your neighborhood all use the same key. Story 29. The fact that 10% of severe injuries or illnesses inflicted on students of the American public school system are self-inflicted. That's how desperate some kids are to just not be in school. Broken bones, major throw-up, high fevers, all to just avoid sitting through 7 hours of what they see as torture. Some could be life-threatening, but do they care? I don't think so. It's honestly so disturbing to think about. My niece climbed a tree in her backyard and flung herself off it, breaking her arm and spraining her ankle. She got lucky as it could have been much, much worse. To avoid a test that her teacher didn't prepare her class for. The pressure and the lack of care implemented by the public school system in America is just disgusting. Story 30. That it's a fact that the Earth, over its many billion years of life, has been rocked by a bunch of planets killing rogue asteroids. It's what started the last ice age. I'm a Catholic and believe in Jesus, but I also believe humanity is likely far older than we know. Years of AD were a restart of mankind as we know it, not the start. So, it's more than probable to happen again. Yes, we're starting to develop technology to defend against that. Nevertheless, there's too much space to watch, so if we get hit, it's likely we likely wouldn't see it even coming, especially if it's coming with the sun at its back. Messed up we would be. Man, sends shivers down my spine even now.